Ethiopia has officially embarked on comprehensive macroeconomic reform policy implementation. Following the political change in 2018, the government has been implementing numerous economic reforms. Over the past 6 years, these reforms have aimed to address long-standing economic structural problems. The main inherited economic challenges include debt burden, inflation, unemployment, slow economic structural change, low sector productivity and competitiveness, along with poor performance of development projects and resource mismanagement. The country's massive reform carried out months ago has the utmost potential to unload the country's bottlenecks. The governor of National Bank of Ethiopia, in this regard, mentions the rationale behind the introduction of this new macroeconomic reform.
The Ethiopian public sector and the Ethiopian private sector had a significant shortage of foreign currency. Those four issues need to be properly tackled. And that was basically the genesis and the background to the homegrown economic reform program. And I think it's important for the listeners to understand that in Ethiopia, we needed a transition of the economic model where it was dependent on public investment to one that is private sector driven, to the one that supports productive growth. That transition is needed, and that transition was needed out of necessity because the old model was not sustainable, but also out of choice because we need to embrace a new source of growth in the economy, including the productive sectors.
The governor has also said that the structural reforms in the energy sector and telecom sector, along with the reforms in sectoral sector that contain agriculture, ICT, tourism and mining, had been introduced prior to the current macroeconomic reform of the country, paving ways for one of the widely recognizable decisions that the country regulated this year. He entails the reform is quite historic in Ethiopian economy, making the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia healthy and stable.
And what we achieved is truly historic. It was historic, it was bold, it was comprehensive, and it's also coordinated. I say it was historic because we've attempted to tackle issues and policies that have not been touched in Ethiopia for the last 50 years. It was bold because we tried to address it in a completely different way. It was comprehensive and coordinated. It's because we're not just looking at one issue, we're looking at multiple issues, and there was a deep coherence and consistency among different initiatives and among different government agencies. We wanted to address the legacy debt that CB had when it comes to public commercial companies. That had to be tackled through innovative ways. So we recapitalized the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, and a big part of the debt was shifted to the treasury, to the government, and we once again made the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia healthy and stable.
Ethiopia has become one of the fastest growing economies in the world by achieving robust economic growth over the past 6 years. Mamu also says the biggest country with undeniable influence in Africa, Ethiopia should attract eyes of foreign direct investors who he says have an undisputed role on economic situations of a country. He further states the reform targets eliminating inflation in years ahead through aggrandizing potentials and reducing debts.
Ethiopia is a large country. It's one of the biggest countries in the African continent. What that means is it will always be in the radar of foreign direct investors. It will always attract private capital in the economy because people want to take advantage of that. Another thing is we also benefit from the demographic transition. We have a youth that's ready to work. So always there is labor that will support the economic growth in Ethiopia. Another very, very important investment is the investment in clean energy. Our prudent monetary policy will significantly reduce inflation in the years ahead. So our expectation is next year, inflation will be in sort of high single digit. And that is partly because of the prudent monetary policies that we are currently implementing, and partly because of the supply side measures that the government is taking, including increasing the productivity of agriculture. So this will help us stabilize price of foods. So on the macro front, I think there will be significant progress.
Ethiopia's move in the macroeconomic reform is expected to tackle the holding back factors that the country has been highly tested for, as it has been witnessed in the past few months.